I wasn't always a strong type maxi guy. Like started out in JavaScript working full time and kind of liked that there weren't any types. I feel like this is the evolution of most programmers. It's like they're young, they have their first programming language, which is like probably Python, Ruby, or JavaScript. And those are all not strongly typed. And then, you're super into like the idea of converting the same variable between numbers and strings, and you like that you can do that. And in JavaScript, you can like add strings and numbers and stuff like that. But then sort of like as you like work more in teams and stuff, or at least I sort of got this way where I found TypeScript and it was a lot more productive because then I didn't have to like spend a bunch of time reasoning about code.
On this episode, we talked with Tom and Jake, who are maintainers of Wagmi and viem and now Rivet as well. This is a really fun conversation. Kevin, I'm curious what your takeaways were.
Yeah, it was cool to hear. I mean, they now have very popular tools throughout the Ethereum front end and even some back end stack. And so I was really excited to have them on. We talked a lot about like type safety, and we talked about just like how the tooling ecosystem has evolved in Ethereum over time. So a really awesome episode, and looking forward to everyone listening.
All right, let's jump into it. We are here with Tom and Jake, who are maintainers of Wagmi and viem, also working on Rivet. Super excited to be chatting today, guys.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate you inviting us into the podcast.
Yeah, same. Thanks. Super excited to be here and to chat about whatever we end up chatting about.
I'm excited as well.
Yeah.
We were saying before we started recording that this is our first pod with two guests, so we will see how this goes. But super excited to be chatting about all the things that you guys have been doing in the space. Before we dive into all of those things, maybe we can start with background on both of you and how you got into crypto and how the hell you got here. Maybe we can start with Tom and then go to Jake.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I've always been interested in like building things. I got an iPhone as like one of my first phones and was really interested in like building apps and like figuring out that whole side of things. And that progressed to building stuff for the web, and then graduated from school and worked on a startup, and then sort of was more into like consumer products. So I worked on a startup called Kit. And then Patreon acquired Kits, then worked at Patreon for a while, and then worked at Meager, which is a crypto blogging platform. And then from Meager, just started working on Wagmi. And then, just have been working on open source full time since November. And how I got into crypto is I have a friend that has been into crypto for a long time, John Palmer, and he'd constantly been telling me about it over the years. And then I remember there was just like this one time we went for a walk, and he explained to me how Uniswap worked. And I was like, paying attention for some reason, and it just made a lot of sense. And that's sort of like how I got into it.
I love that he just happened to catch you on a day when you were paying attention and interested.
Yeah, I mean, I'd been adjacent to crypto, working in technology, had bought some coins and stuff like that. It's like, the straw that broke the camel's back, and then I was finally into it. And it made a lot of sense, like the stuff that I was working on at the time, working at Patreon. A lot of the problems that existed at Patreon at the time were like payments for creators, and a lot of adult content creators or creators that the existing payments infrastructure didn't want to support. And those creators were getting hit with chargebacks, and then Visa, MasterCard were threatening to pull payments away from Patreon. So then they had to get booted off, and then OnlyFans sort of took off on the back of that. So anyway.
All very bullish crypto. Jake, what about you?
Yeah, I've been programming professionally for about 9 years now. So I graduated uni at the end of 2014 and pretty much delved my way into coding full-time since then. I started off as a founding engineer at a health claiming and payments platform startup here in Melbourne, Australia. So I'm from Australia, if you couldn't tell from my accent. And I was there for 6 years until they got acquired in 2020, just before COVID happened. And then, after that, I was working for an Australian cryptocurrency exchange called CoinJar. It's like one of the first Australian cryptocurrency exchanges that got established in 2014 as well, I think. And I worked there for about a year, and that's when I started dipping my toes into crypto. And I kind of like organically just went down the rabbit hole of where can I go next with crypto and Web3. And about a year after working at CoinJar, I got poached by Mike at Rainbow, and then he was like, yo, come to Rainbow. And I'm like, yeah, I'll come to Rainbow. So I went to Rainbow, and yeah, that's when I started like really, really getting into like Ethereum and Web3 and stuff. And that's when I started working on Wagmi as a kind of side gig with Tom. Yeah, at the end of last year of 2022, that's when Tom and I went full-time on Wagmi in November. So yeah, we've just been doing Wagmi, VM, Rivet and related things full-time since then, like almost a year now. So yeah.
Yeah, pretty wild. Yeah, in terms of Wagmi, I think it's interesting how it got started. I feel like Jake and I have sort of followed this philosophy as we built other projects. But yeah, so I was working at Meager and had built a lot of the website and stuff like that, but didn't love the tools that I was using just because I figured things could be a little bit better than they were. And around the end of November in 2021, I had like a few days off for Thanksgiving holiday in the US and, just played around with like a little prototype, see if I could make something that was a little bit better. And I was like really excited about it even after just working on it for 2 days, and it didn't have all the features. It wasn't like usable as a library. It was just like a single page app, with some code. And then put it down for like a month because there was something that we were trying to release at the end of the year at Meager. And then the last week of the year, I took off and just sort of cranked through the rest of it, added a bunch of docs, and then launched it on January 4th, which is my birthday, which I was like, this will be like a fun thing to do. Either like it will totally pan and it'll be fun because it's like my birthday and I'll get to celebrate that, or it will do really well and I'll have like this double thing. And so it ended up doing really well, like tweeted it out. I think it got a lot of retweets, and I think that initial distribution was pretty key. I don't know, Jake, how you heard about it, but then I think Jake wrote like an RFC to make Wagmi better. I think sometime at the end of January, maybe early February. And I was shocked. It was really well written. It was this big thing of like, I like this library. It's really cool, but here's some things that can make it better. And I was really impressed that someone did that, but still like a little nervous. When you release something, it's a little fragile. And this is like going to be a big change. Like, do I want to accept this in? I think some of this too is about control. Like people, especially founders or like, creators of things, have difficulty with trying to figure out how much control to give up, how much, they should keep for themselves. But yeah, ultimately Jake and I collaborated on that RFC and released it. I think it maybe took us a month and a half or so. It was a pretty big change to Wagmi, but it was spot on. It was the right thing to do and definitely made it a lot better. And then after that, we just started like collaborating on more and more stuff. And yeah, also the power of open source too, because Jake's in Australia, I'm in Brooklyn. We still haven't met IRL yet. We're going to meet up at the end of November in Austria. So yeah, super excited for that. Yeah, Jake, I'm curious how you got involved. Also, yeah, any other questions down to answer too?
Yeah, I'm not too sure how I heard about Wagmi, but I think it was just from Twitter. But yeah, I guess before Wagmi, like I was almost going to rewrite Web3 React myself, like kind of what you did. Then I saw like Wagmi got released, so I was like, oh, Wagmi is already pretty good code and good foundation. I was like, oh, maybe I'll just try and contribute to this instead. So yeah, I guess that's where it all started off. So yeah, the RFC was called like deterministic states and caching or something. And you're basically adding like a caching layer onto Wagmi and being able to like cache things that we can on Ethereum over the network. So yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned potentially, Jake, considering like rewriting Web3 React yourself. And obviously, Tom, you're also frustrated because you spent your time over the holidays building Wagmi. And so for people who aren't familiar with Wagmi or haven't used it, maybe you can Wagmi pill us on sort of the high level overview of the major sort of challenge and how Wagmi approaches it there.
Yeah, for sure. Really, it all comes down to, are you building an app on top of Ethereum? If so, you should use Wagmi because it's going to make everything a lot easier that you need to do, like interacting with the blockchain, connecting wallets, all the popular ones like MetaMask, Coinbase Wallet, anything that is a mobile wallet like Rainbow, Family, basically like most wallets, Ledger, stuff like that has support. And so basically what was cool about it is it takes these things that have different APIs, like, connecting a hardware wallet, connecting a browser wallet, reading data from the blockchain, writing data to the blockchain, and then combines them into like this uniform API that has really good developer experience, like type safety, and get nice autocomplete in your editor, stuff like that. Yeah.
Very cool. I think developers that have been in this space should probably have interacted with some form of a library like Wagmi, whether they've interacted with Wagmi themselves. And I think over time, we've seen a few generations of these sorts of libraries come out. I think in the early days, it was like the Web3.js, maybe used app and Truffle. Maybe like we'll call it generation 2 is like Ethers.js, Web3, React, Hardhat. And now more recently, it's been like viem, Wagmi, and Foundry. And so can you talk a little bit about why you think that developers should pay the switching cost if they might already be familiar with an existing library? Like what benefits does Wagmi provide? And then maybe after that, we can talk a little bit about viem and how those two connect to each other.
Yeah, for sure. I think if you're using one of those older technologies or like, cobbled your own thing together or like looking for something new, I think Wagmi is a great option because a lot of people use it. There's like some higher level libraries built on top of it, like Connect modals like RainbowKit, ConnectKit. There's like other libraries built on top of it, like Reservoir, which is like an NFT, SDK, marketplace buying thing. But I think ultimately it has good docs, it has tests, it's like really stable, lots of places are using it. It definitely is not fun to refactor an existing app, especially when it has like a lot going on. And it might not be worth it if you have a company that is already committed to one direction. But if you're starting a new project or if you feel like you're wasting time using tools right now that like aren't as great, it's probably worthwhile to switch. I think the biggest thing in my mind is static types. It's like if you're interacting with the blockchain, especially writing data, interacting with contracts, like, an extra zero or, making something a big number when it should be like a number that can like cost you like orders of magnitude, if you're just adding like extra zeros on by accident. And so, yeah, it's probably just the right move to do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And for what it's worth, I've paid the switching costs at each step of those generations. I used to work at Truffle and then I switched to playing around with Hardhat, and now I'm like all in on Foundry. And similarly, I've seen improvements with each step of the way. Jake, maybe you could give us a high level on viem and what the peer dependency relationship is between Wagmi and viem.
Yeah, so I guess viem is modular building blocks for Ethereum and low-level building blocks. So it's more of like an opinion-less pure implementation for like Ethereum. I guess I should say like interface for Ethereum. And yeah, so Wagmi has a peer dependency on viem. So Wagmi is built onto a viem to provide like higher level building blocks suited for like dApps and wallets to interface with Ethereum. Yeah, I guess Wagmi was originally built on Ethers. We switched to viem obviously a few months ago, but we originally were built on top of Ethers for about a year, ever since Wagmi was founded, I guess. Like we were constantly being like bottlenecked by some things in the underlying implementation, like sluggish multi-calls due to like unoptimized ABI coding and thrashy event list behavior on like layer 2s, because like some layer 2s may emit blocks on every transaction or like every second, and sometimes like consumers want to have control over when those event listeners get called. And other stuff like contractor results not serializing correctly in JavaScript. I guess we wanted to work around these behaviors. We had to constantly branch and like hack around these things to create workarounds. And I guess we had the choice of contributing to these existing external libraries, like how I did with Wagmi, creating RFCs and stuff. But the trade-off between waiting for those PRs and issues to be merged downstream or rolling out something ourselves where if something wrong happened, we can like patch it instantly and have control over it. I guess we wanted to build like a fully stable and never breaking solution for our consumers. We want to move fast and not break anything. So that's like kind of why we built viem, because we just wanted to create something that was modular, had healthy open source culture, low bundle size, performance, and yeah, most of all stable. So why we built viem and why it's useful, I guess.
Yeah, Wagmi was initially built on Ethers. Ethers is still like a very solid library. I think one of the hardest things you can do as a software engineer is like when you're approaching a new problem to be like, should I use this existing technology or should I rewrite this thing from scratch? And I feel like most people that you talk to, alarm bells start to go off when you're like, let's just rewrite this thing from scratch, because it's just a sign of you might not understand the problem that this thing solves and how detailed and everything that it does. And so you're just going to dive in and not know that there's lots of tricky stuff that's happening under the scenes that's just abstracted away that you don't really know anything about. And so, yeah, that was like a tricky decision, especially because it was like, kind of working in Wagmi. Things worked okay. We had some workarounds, but it wasn't the worst thing.
Did it make you have an appreciation for certain things in Ethers.js and having to rebuild it where you're like, damn, I did not really recognize this nuance?
Yeah, we definitely appreciate everything that Ethers did. Like, we wouldn't get to this stage without Ethers, and it was pretty daunting trying to reach parity at first. There's a lot of things to cover. There's like a lot of API in Ethers that we need to reach parity with. And yeah, it was a challenge to reach parity, but I think we've gotten there in the end. Yeah, Ethers is like, it's still a great library, but I guess we just wanted to create some diversity in the space. So yeah.
Yeah. And I guess like some other things that Jake didn't mention are like, we come from solving these problems from like a browser side of things. And there's some things that are important in a browser, like bundle size, like how much code has to be sent over the network and then load up in someone's browser that's using it. And so, yeah, we thought that we could improve it a lot, and we ended up improving it a pretty decent amount. I forget exactly what the number was. It depends how much you use of the code and with like tree shaking and stuff like that. But, if you're just using one function, it's pretty significant. Maybe it's like 20, 30 times smaller. It might even be more. I haven't checked in a little while, but yeah, it's definitely much smaller. And then, yeah, some other stuff that we really cared about too is we're kind of really into TypeScript and all of that stuff. And there's this library called ABI type that we wrote originally just for Wagmi. It's like a API type of contract where you call a blockchain like an Ethereum contract, and it specifies like these are the function names and these are the arguments that you can use in there, like these types. And so we created this library called ABI type, which allows you to take that ABI in code and then extract types out of it using TypeScript statically. And then that adds like really nice autocomplete and validation for stuff. So yeah, because that existed for Wagmi, we're like, okay, like we'll move it over to VM, and VM will have all these really great things too. And yeah, I think the architectures are different too. So they definitely are like competing libraries, but each one sort of has a different philosophy on what it does. And yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're building on existing infrastructure that you sort of already had. And you both mentioned VM being much faster and more lightweight. I'm curious, how did you make that happen?
Yeah, I guess this was just like building things from scratch with like pragmatism. We built out the ABI coding, RLP coding, and like other encoding and parsing algorithms once, and it ended up being faster. So we didn't really bother optimizing anything. But there's definitely like still room for improvement in those algorithms and stuff too. I've been looking into migrating some of our coding algorithms to use cursors instead of copying arrays and stuff, which I've been doing RLP coding just recently, and it turns out to be 300 times faster than our old implementation, which was faster than other alternatives. So it's pretty impressive what we can do to further optimize these things. And you might be wondering, why should I make an algorithm 300 times faster? What's the difference between like 30 microseconds versus 90 nanoseconds or whatever? But like, it's pretty important for if you're encoding for very large multi-calls. A lot of aggregators do this, and you definitely notice the performance hit when you do those kinds of encoding and decoding. And also for like blob transactions, like 484 transactions, we're RLP coding 2 kilobytes of data potentially. So yeah, that's the gist.
Yeah, can you either of you go on like a 30-second, 1-minute tangent on RLP or recursive length prefix serialization, like what that means at just a high level and how you were able to use that in this case?
Yeah, so I guess RLPs in VM, it's mostly useful for like serializing transactions. So before you sign a transaction, you need a RLP encode it. So in a transaction, there's like a set of properties like fees and gas and access lists. and data, call data, and you can represent that as an RLP structure, which is like recursive length prefix. It's like a recursive array kind of. Your transaction is built out as like a list of properties that may contain arrays. Like access list contains arrays with like hex values. It's like this whole list contains binary data. RLP encode it into like this one flat encoded format that you then like hash with kekak and then like sign it, then send it over the network or something like that. So that's like the gist of it from a high level end-to-end perspective. So that's what RLP kind of enables, kind of efficient transaction signing and sending it over the network. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, yeah, I appreciate that. I want to take a second and step back and maybe talk about strong typing generally. For me, as a Web 2 developer, before I got into crypto, I was in like the Ruby on Rails stack, and it's not strongly typed, right? It's like weak typing, or you'll hear the phrase duck typing, which is like if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck and swims like a duck, it's probably a duck, which just basically means like check the object that you are interacting with and make sure that it can do the things that you want it to before you just start assuming that it can. Fast forward to my time in Web3, and I've definitely been strongly type pilled since. But what would you say it is that isn't pretty inherent to like the Ethereum ecosystem? Why is everyone so on board with strong typing? And like, what is it about Ethereum that has sort of garnered that reputation?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I mean, first of all, I wasn't always a strong type maxi. I like started out in JavaScript working full time and kind of liked that there weren't any types. I feel like this is the evolution of most programmers. It's like they're young, they have their first programming language, which is like probably Python, Ruby, or JavaScript. And those are all not strongly typed. And then, you're super into like the idea of converting the same variable between numbers and strings. And you like that you can do that. And in JavaScript, you can like add strings and numbers and stuff like that. And it's kind of like this weird thing. But then sort of like as you like work more in teams and stuff, or at least I sort of got this way where I found TypeScript and it was a lot more productive because then I didn't have to like spend a bunch of time reasoning about code. And I think similarly, like with Ethereum, really, if you wanted strong types on the front end, you had to like reach for something like TypeChain, which generates types from ABIs. You like give it an ABI, maybe from like a Hard Hat or a Foundry project or something, and then it will go generate TypeScript types for it, which is basically like just traversing the ABI and concatenating strings. And I think it's important because if you want to interact with contracts and make sure that like you're calling these things appropriately, and making sure that people don't lose gas with things reverting, or people don't, accidentally send more than they were intending to. As a developer, it's like nice to be able to use those things, especially if you're working in a team. And yeah, TypeScript has gotten to the point where it's like has its own type level programming language that's Turing complete. So basically, as long as you don't need to access some lower level cryptography libraries inside of your type programming, although you probably could, you just need to like write those implementations. But as long as you don't need to do that or like make network requests, you can basically do whatever you want in type programming, like pull out these values and then add like really good validation and stuff like that. And like developer experience, like autocomplete, which makes it a lot faster to build too.
Yeah, I think, like you said, it makes sense that a lot of developers start out in a weak typed language because there's less to learn up front and you can move fast and loose. But then over time, you start to realize that you're spending a lot of time basically checking types to make sure that what you're interacting with isn't going to break. And by switching over to a more strongly typed language, you kind of get these guardrails that will actually speed you along and kind of like guide you as you're developing. To the question around why Ethereum is so into this idea, I think just because like the EVM comes with types. And so why drop them and lose them higher up the stack? Let's continue and use those types to kind of propel us. I'm curious for either of you, did you catch the drama with DHH and like the Rails world and the type situation? Did either of you want to summarize that, or I can give a high level?
I mean, I would love to. I mean, and then anyone else can jump in. I'd say my summary is one thing. I saw this really good tweet. I wish I knew who it was so I could give credit. Maybe we can find it and link it or something if you do that. It's basically like DHH took this library that Basecamp was maintaining called Turbo Links. I don't exactly know what it is, like a framework for like, building reactive web apps with basically just like HTML and like a small amount of JavaScript. Then they removed TypeScript from that library. And yeah, the tweet I saw, which I think is really smart, is like this person was like, types exist no matter what. They either exist in your code or in your head. And so by dropping TypeScript, as library maintainers, they now need to like reason about their code. And anyone else that contributes to the library needs to do that. And then like as downstream users, like anyone that uses Turbo Links and like wants to use like a function or something, they have to, read the docs or look at the source code and then have to remember, this is what it gets passed in where, and these are responses and all that stuff. Yeah.
That makes sense. Jake, did you have any additional thoughts on them?
If they like remove TypeScript from like one of the apps that they were building, like I'd be like, everyone just chill, like they can just use whatever they want. But since it's a library, I feel like the outroar is kind of understandable because people are actually end users of this library, and a lot of people like rely on types to discover the API of libraries and stuff. So yeah, it's just interesting how they went down that path. And I don't really have any strong opinions on it, but yep.
Yeah, it seemed like the other aspect of the backlash was just the way that they didn't really communicate it. They just pulled the plug, and there was a lot of open source contributions that had PRs open that were suddenly just like, those PRs are trash now. And yeah, I mean, I think the way that you described it makes a lot of sense, because it's the difference between being able to just hover your mouse and see the entire structure, the shape of the object, versus having to go dig through a bunch of different files and docs.
Yeah, for sure. I also think too, it's like you don't have to use TypeScript to get all the benefits of it. Like if you're a Wagmi consumer and you use JavaScript, you just have to add like a jsconfig.json file to like your project, and you'll still get the benefit of autocomplete and some type hints in your editor. There won't be a compile step where you can like actually check the types, but you'll still get some of that in there as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Switching gears a little bit, something that I want to make sure we cover is Rivet, which you guys recently launched. Can you talk a little bit about what Rivet is and what the impetus behind it was?
Yeah, sure. So, I think this is like a similar thing. It's like, Jake and I are both developers, and we've sort of like gone through this whole process of building Wagmi because we needed something, building VM because we needed something. And then like another part of the stack, which seemed could be improved for us and like what we do every day as developers, is having some sort of developer tools, higher level like interface that allowed you to do some stuff. Just because like when you're developing blockchain apps, there are some times when the feedback loops get really, really long because you're dealing with state of the network and you build up all this state in your app, and then you like press a button and something didn't go the way you wanted it to, and now you have to like go back again and build up all that state. And so yeah, I think this was just developer tools, wallet. We're familiar with the React developer tools, and Rivet is like this higher level interface where you can do everything you can do with a wallet, but also manipulate the network.
Yeah. And so I've seen the flow. I guess we could kind of try to describe it as like, you imagine your typical browser plugin wallet, but this is definitely geared. Like it's a form for the developer to put in whatever config that they want in there. Can you talk a little bit about what the reason is why a developer might need a developer-focused wallet, and then maybe a little like digging under the hood, what actually is happening? Are you forking the network? Is it like something that runs in the browser? How does it actually work?
Yeah, so Rivet is like, a browser extension that like enables developers to like inspect, debug, modify, and manipulate the state of a local Ethereum node. So you can either like fork the node off like the current state of Ethereum, or you can just spin one up from like block 0 and then build state up yourself. So I guess like you can like manipulate things like accounts, blocks, contracts, and even like the node itself. A cool example of where it's useful is, say you're going on like Uniswap and you want to test out a few swaps. With Rivet, you can like impersonate an account. Like you could impersonate like Vitalik.eth, then set his native ETH balance to like 999999, and then like add on a few like ERC20 tokens, like set the balance at 0 or something. Then you can like perform swaps in Uniswap from the native token to like DAI or like USDC or something, and then actually perform swaps from like the production Uniswap app. So like swap like ETH to like USDC or something, then you can actually see the change propagate in Rivet or the wallet. And yeah, you can also like set balances on those ERC20 tokens and then like, go the other way as well. And yeah, I guess in the future, we want to build more of like a time travel kind of feature where you can time travel back in time to like previous blocks and like replay transactions from a previous block and then like fast forward back to like the current block or something like that. So there's like a lot of cool features that we want to build. I've just recently been building cold data decoding. So when you go to make a transaction that interacts with the contract, you can actually see the decoded cold data instead of like a long hex string that you can't really inspect. So like the decoded cold data stuff like breaks down the decoded arguments to parameters and like shows like intuitive view to like inspect each parameter. What I'm working on next is decoded cold traces and stuff. So it'd be good to like inspect that as well. So yeah, it's like the kind of overall gist and like a little sneak peek on what we're working on now. So
yeah, I think it's sort of like the interface that I imagined would have already existed by now, and it hasn't seemed to come to fruition until the two of you put this together. But I think the analogy with the React developer tools, like especially front-end developers, are used to having first-class citizen tools built into the browser, whether through an extension or just like directly into Chrome. And so being able to manipulate state, give yourself infinite ETH, it sounds like you're taking the functionality that Vitalik's master node already has and you're giving that to regular developers.
Exactly. I mean, even stuff just like, at some point being able to mint NFTs for yourself from existing collection, or being able to really quickly deploy a contract and then use that. I mean, how bad was it when, people still have to go through this when run out of some native token and then have to like go ask your friends or coworkers or go to like a faucet or something and get more. And evidenced by like people selling them earlier this year. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's like a bad state where in order to be a developer, you have to spend money to test something. It's not a good place to be in. So yeah, more tools like this, I think, kind of important. Now, Tom, we met at the Rust Ethereum event a couple weeks ago, and it was a lot of talks, developer talks specifically about Rust tooling. And then there was like TypeScript stuff. So first, like, what was your experience at that event? And I think you did a good job of pitching why it makes sense for TypeScript and Rust to be friends. But yeah, did you want to give kind of a high level about what you talked about during that?
Yeah, for sure. I was a little nervous coming to a Rust event and, giving a non hardcore Rust talk, but ended up talking about the projects that we've been working on, which are TypeScript, and then how that can potentially connect to Rust. And yeah, the type was about using Rust libraries in like a JavaScript context, like in the browser with Wasm, and then having strong TypeScript types bundled as part of them, which allows, JavaScript developers, TypeScript developers to have like really nice developer experience with like autocomplete in their editor, type checking, type safety, all this stuff. And it ended up had this demo where it spun up like a Wasm wallet, created a new wallet in the browser, and then signed some really basic type data, and compared that with the Rust version, Wasm version versus what's currently in VM. And no surprise, the Rust version is significantly faster. It's not something that, for that specific method of signing type data that someone would probably notice, because the bottleneck is probably the wallet, if there was wallet using it, showing you a prompt and stuff like that. And it's also just milliseconds. I think it was 8 milliseconds versus 65 milliseconds or something, which just isn't perceivable. So if there's user interaction involved, it probably doesn't matter. But if you were writing something in Node.js and you want it to be really fast, get the benefits of Rust, because maybe you're writing an MEV bot or something, then it could be really nice, because then it's you get to write your stuff basically in JavaScript with nice type safety, and then get a bunch of performance benefits on the other side. So,
gotcha. And now anviljs, high level, sounds like a TypeScript wrapper around Foundry's Anvil. Is that at a high level roughly what that does?
Yeah, it's not quite as nice as that. It basically exposes some methods in JavaScript that allows you to run Anvil commands over the CLI. It'd be nice if there were Anvil bindings for Wasm, and then this was just JavaScript types packaged as part of that, but unfortunately not in that world right now.
Yeah, it sounds like you still have like Rust installed and anvils running, but it's more to like make it accessible to your JavaScript application.
For sure, yeah. It works really well. Like we use it in like our test suites for Wagmi and VM to spin up Anvil instances in the background, so you can like run multiple tests in parallel and be hitting multiple Anvil instances and stuff like that.
Yeah, the anviljs repo was actually an external contribution from Sebastian Lorenz, so shout out to him.
Yeah, we're meeting up with Sebastian in Austria in November, so super excited for that.
Getting the crew together. We love to see it.
Exactly.
Yeah, me and Tom have never met in real life, so I guess this is a good opportunity to finally meet after like nearly 2 years of building things and working together. So
yeah, we're just about as far away as you could probably be from each other. So it should be cool to collaborate in person. I feel like most of the work we do is like very async, like classic open source stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of amazing that you've been able to build several tools or a few tools that people really, really love, totally on separate sides of the world and mostly async. I guess I'm curious, maybe this is something you'll talk about in Austria, but something that Kevin and I were talking about before is like, it feels like Wagmi and viem and hopefully Rivet all create like just significantly better developer experiences for things that are just very rough around the edges right now. And so I'm curious, are there other areas in the Web3 dev experience where you're like, damn, this really could be better? Are there things that you're sort of keeping an eye on and watching out for? I'm curious on both of your takes on that.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think a lot of this is a question of like time. If I do something, if Jake and I work on something together, we want to do like a really incredible job. Like we don't want to release some software that's not great that we also don't have the time to maintain. But I guess if we had time, yeah, there's definitely some things. I think end-to-end testing is like really bad right now and like really important because it's like every time you deploy a new version of like a front end, let's say Uniswap, the canonical example, it's like, how do you know that it's still going to work when like someone connects their wallet and like clicks the swap button? And so end-to-end testing is something that can help with that. I think like some higher level libraries like that are more like interface-y is always interesting because Jake and I have like a background of like, you know, building React components, building design systems. So I think there's some opportunity there, especially for things that are really common and lots of people are building. I think maybe the approach there is like to build like headless solutions that allow people to style stuff the way they want them. And yeah, just make sure things are accessible, customizable. Yeah, I think there's like some other things that we're interested in, or at least that I'm interested in, that are a little more nascent. And then also like, you know, there's always like the potential that like Wagmi expands out into like different frameworks besides React. There's going to be an alpha of this V2 of Wagmi dropping soon, which will make it a lot easier to build additional framework adapters beyond React. And so, yeah, definitely open for that. I know there's like a few teams that use Svelte in Vue and crypto, but the vast majority of it is still React. So probably React for the time being. But yeah, Jake, what do you think?
yeah, I guess it's pretty much the same thoughts as you. I don't really have much to add.
I got the chance to use Wagmi CLI this weekend for the permissionless hackathon. And when you were talking about like maybe there's room for kind of boilerplate React tooling library where you have like common patterns, like reading from contracts, writing to contracts, like calling a min function. For starters, like a huge shout out to Wagmi CLI. It creates custom hooks that allows you to like take the contract in your function and generate the React hook for that specific function. And so you can just say like use mint function or whatever it is that you're doing. So like it builds that glue for you. And then you do in some of the templates, I think I followed like kind of smushed together the rainbow template with like the Foundry template. But you do kind of have some of those example components for like obvious recurring patterns. Maybe talk a little bit more about that and where you see more opportunity for that, you know, component library of common patterns.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the Wagmi CLI is like really cool and very underused. At its core, it's just basically this way to manage your ABIs from different sources, whether that's like a block explorer, like Etherscan. A lot of people copy and paste. I've definitely spent lots of time copy and pasting ABIs from Etherscan, or like your local Foundry or Hardhat project, especially if it's in a monorepo. So basically, you know, is this CLI that like takes ABIs in and then like spits out ABIs in code. So yeah, you can generate React hooks, or you could write, you know, a plugin that does anything really, especially like if your company has some smart contracts, you could just like write a plugin that just has like all of those addresses embedded in it, which would probably be like 10 lines of code. Then someone could just like download that and then add it to their CLI config file, and then they can start using your contracts right away.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jake, did you have any other thoughts on like this component library opportunity space?
Yeah, I think it'd be cool to have like, do you know that SHA CDN UI thing that's been popping off over the last few months? Like the copy and pastable components with Tailwind. Yeah, I feel like it'd be cool to have a kind of similar thing in the Web3 space. Like, there's a lot of libraries that ship with opinionated UI already, but I think it'd be cool to move towards more of a headless approach where, say, you could have like these copy and pastable snippets on like a website somewhere that you can just copy and paste into your code, and then like you can just leave it and go with that opinionated behavior, or you can tweak it yourself to like your code style. So that's like my take on it. I think that would be cool because the logic's already there, I guess.
Even making it easier to like use like whatever style system you use. It kind of isn't like great to use like a UI library that like uses styled components if you use Tailwind or, you know, whatever. So it's nice to be able to like bring your own style developer tool along with that, and then yeah, just be able to plug that in too. I think there's lots of common things that you could do. You could do like, you know, bridging flows, like a little bridging component, like a swap widget, like an ENS, like update avatar, or like record one, like an address input, or like some like form inputs with validation for certain things like addresses or like values and stuff. Yeah, I think there's lots of opportunity for building stuff like that. I do think it is more challenging though, because, you know, building stuff for the browser, accessibility, like making sure stuff works in like Firefox and Chrome isn't necessarily a super glamorous thing to do. So I guess that's why Jake and I have tried to stay like further down in the stack, but maybe at some point it's like an inevitable thing.
Yeah, I anticipate that it will be. I think we've now lived with Web3 patterns and seen them evolve over the last few years, and like it doesn't make sense to continue recreating the wheel every single time you start a new project. I think to what you were saying, like the ideal solution would be one that comes with some sort of a default styling, but you could very easily rip it out and like apply your own. We've seen a lot of like in the Web 2 front end library world, we've seen the whole spectrum of way overly opinionated UI libraries to like under opinionated, where it's not really doing a whole lot for you, but like giving a little bit of flexibility. I think that's the approach. There's a lot of hackathons coming up if anyone listening wants to throw something like this together. But yeah, I'll give both of you a chance to maybe shill something that some other sort of tooling or library or pattern that you've found in the space that's been really helpful for you. We'll exclude the tools that you yourselves have built because we've talked a lot about those. But anything else that you think that devs could like take today and run with and learn about?
Yeah, I guess like from a high level perspective, I want to shill like a few libraries. Like Radix UI for like accessibility is really, really useful, and you can like bootstrap some accessible headless components quite easily. Then like you can style them with like Tailwind or vanilla extract or whatever style solution you use. So I guess like a lot of developers know these already, but I just don't want to shill them just cause. And I guess like from more of a low level perspective, I want to shill like Paul Miller's cryptography libraries, like noble hashes and noble curves and all that, because we wouldn't have built all the account related stuff in VM without it. It's very like ergonomic and intuitive to use as well. So definitely huge shout out to Paul Miller. Tom?
Yeah, I'm going to shill two things. One is like a tech product, and there's like a more abstract concept. First thing I will shill, which isn't necessarily super related to this, but I think is really cool and more people should do it, is NeoVim. It's like pretty great. I use it. It definitely changes like the way that you think about writing code. Especially I feel like if you're like bored with maybe the day job of like writing code and you want something to like spice it up a little bit and like make it like a video game more interesting and fun, I would definitely like try to do it. I think it definitely helps like, you know, the way you think about things. And the other thing is more of like an abstract concept, which is I would say just like if you like are excited about stuff and you like are a situation in your life where you're able to do this, I would definitely contribute to open source libraries or like write your own. It's such a good way to like learn. Wagmi wasn't the first open source library I made. I made two before that were more like learning projects, building tools for myself that like, you know, weren't super popular, but definitely like helped me understand how do I build the library? How do I deal with user feedback, issues, bug reports, setting a roadmap and stuff like that, which I think were invaluable when like I started off on Wagmi. And the other cool thing is like you can just, when you're contributing or like building your own and like become somewhat popular, you get to like work with so many different people like all over the world working on many different things depending on what the technology is. And yeah, I mean, it's allowed me to like meet Jake, you know, chat with other people, and yeah, just like, yeah, contribute to open source. It's great. And that doesn't necessarily mean like writing code. Like you can write docs, you can just write like TypeScript types, you can like help triage issues or just like promote stuff. But yeah, would highly recommend it. And we're always looking for people that like want to like help out with the stuff that we work on and like are more than happy to spend time. Like if you want to contribute to like Wagmi VM or any of our other repos, but like don't know where to get started or need help, we are definitely down to help. And it can be scary when you like first get started because you're like, all these mean people are going to yell at me for like contributing this code. But with our repositories, I'll definitely make sure that that's not the case if you want to get started.
Yeah, I guess another library I want to shill as well is OPVM, built by Wilson from Coinbase. I think you guys had him on the other week. Yeah, he's building some cool like OP stack utilities and actions for VM that you can easily extend your VM client for. So yeah, huge shout out to Wilson as well.
Love that. Well, Tom and Jake, thank you so much for coming on the pod. This was so lovely. Where can people learn more about what you guys are building? Where are sort of the entry points for exploring Wagmi and VM and Rivet and all of the things?
Yeah, I think we need to like have like a website that has like all of our stuff on it, because right now I feel like you either have to go to the repositories or the documentation site. So I would say if you go to github.com/wagmi-dev, so that's probably a good spot. We're Wagmi_sh on Twitter. I'm Awkweb on Twitter. Jake, how do you say your short handle on Twitter?
_JXOM on Twitter.
So those are probably the best places. And if you happen to be in Brooklyn sometime and want to go for a walk and talk about crypto, I'm down. So like, yeah, find me on one of those sources and yeah, we can set something up.
Yeah, same for people in Melbourne.
Or in Austria.
Offer stands.
Yeah, or if you're in Austria, like end of November, early December.
Love it.
I love it. You've created an adventure, like a treasure hunt for the both of you, which is just incredible. Thank you guys so much for coming on the pod. This was so wonderful.